Welcome to AskPsychSessions with Marianne Lloyd, where we ask some of the best teachers we know questions from you, our audience. If you have a question or an idea for a conversation, please visit bit.ly/AskPsychSessions. That's bit.ly/AskPsychSessions. All one word, all lowercase. And here's our next question.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Our next guest is Melanie Domenech Rodríguez from Utah State University. Thank you for joining us today, Melanie.
Thank you for having me here. It's a total pleasure.
Well, before we jump in to the topics that I've lined up for us, could you just tell people a little bit about what you teach at Utah State and a little bit about your kind of training and research background, please?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd be happy to. I had to do this exercise about a year ago, and I couldn't summarize 20 years of my career, so it was quite entertaining, but I've done it now. And I think the crux of what I do is really focused on disparities broadly, on mental health and health disparities, specifically in terms of teaching and training and research, but also sort of broader disparities that have impacts on health and mental health and well-being. So a lot of cultural competence, cultural adaptations. We've gotten into the effectiveness of our training in the context of the diversity issues and treatment and assessment and multicultural psychology courses that I teach. And so sort of health disparities and disparities broadly.
That is a perfect transition because that's why I wanted to bring you in, is I think that as we're starting to pull out of the pandemic a little bit and vaccinations are going, but we kind of have 2.5 semesters where I think some of us are a little more aware of disparities than we used to be, but maybe not fully. And maybe there are some things we're not considering. So if I just give you free rein to talk about why disparities matter in the classroom and how I can be an instructor that's sensitive to them, what would you want me to do?
Wow. Giving me free rein is very enticing. I could go in a lot of different directions. The first thing I think of when I think about disparities in the classroom that may be health disparities or might echo into health disparities, I think about my students. And so I teach both undergraduate and graduate students, and this pandemic has really made a lot of disparities way more evident than we ever considered. And so I knew, for example, theoretically, that I had students that were parents, that I had students with disability that might have accessibility issues, that I had lower income students that might have different accessibility issues, that I had students with mental health issues that needed accommodations. But the pandemic has sort of really cracked that open because we're in each other's homes. And so you see the differences in connections. And I think maybe these things are so discussed now, they may not be particularly novel observations, but I have seen them all year. So you see people with different internet connectivity. You see people with different ability to engage because either isolation or overcrowding, depending on their context, has really had an impact on their well-being. And on, from my Latino context, I always think about nervios and how things get on your nerves. And you can see people that you see them on the screen and turning cameras on and off and what that means and how different students engage that behavior. Sometimes it comes from a position of a lot of privilege, and sometimes it actually comes from a position of trying to manage distress and sort of working through that as an instructor and be really thoughtful and intentional and mindful about, okay, what do I want to do with cameras? Do I want to have one, sweeping rule about cameras need to be on, or do I want to have flexibility? Of course, you've heard the F word. So now, all of us as instructors know that flexibility should always reign, and certainly as a mental health provider. So I think there's just been a lot that I've had to think through this year, considering what is going on with my students as a community of learners, but also with each of them individually, and really seeing how their their social and cultural positionality really is evidenced in their Zoom or sort of online behavior. So it's been a really rich year for noticing those disparities and for being really thoughtful about how to move in the learning space in a way that is optimally inclusive, right? Because I want to learn from my students. I learn from my students every time I have contact. And so I want them to be in a position to engage optimally so they can contribute what they have to contribute. And of course, so they can get as much as they can get from that experience.
Thank you. So I would like to pick up maybe a few things that you said, maybe starting with the mental health piece. Right? So you have expertise here. I do not. But I did notice I have students do these socio-emotional learning exercises where they get to share some information. It's supposed to give them some skills. A lot of anxiety seem to have been ticking up. So are there things professors can do to, one, be more understanding and inclusive, but maybe also it feels like you were, I don't know that word that you just used about getting on people's nerves. I liked it. I want to use it. But am I getting on people's anxiety possibly accidentally with some of what I'm doing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I found, so I think this year has been the year of anxiety and depression. They have either traveled alone or together, but they are traveling on pretty much everybody's lanes. That's what I'm seeing. Even my most even-keeled graduate students who practice mindfulness regularly, anxiety and depression are traveling with them. It's just here for all of us. And it makes sense. We are a pandemic by definition. This is sort of out of our control. And so unless you're a scientist working at the CDC, coming up with these vaccines, which I'm guessing they're anxious and depressed too, we're sort of at the mercy of somebody who knows better that hopefully is coming up with a good solution. And in the meantime, we're trying to keep a sense of normalcy about our lives, except nothing about it is normal, right? And so you sit in a Zoom class and pretend that when you log on at 9:30, everything is just fine and you're showing up to class, but it's not. It's not because somebody's family member got COVID and did really poorly. I don't know how many, I certainly was touched by it. And I know a lot of my students where we had people die, loved ones, and we had to take off and do the things that you do when a family member dies and then do them in a COVID way. So, there's a whole other layer. So I think this has been a year where I have seen anxiety and depression really reign supreme for really good reasons, the isolation and or the overcrowding. I know I'm mentioning both of those, but I think both are important. I think the folks that are isolated have said, well, at least you have company. It's yeah, but I don't have a minute, right? I'm in situ with these people 24/7 and I don't have a moment to hear myself think. And so I think there's stress in both of those places. So when I think about mental health, I really, the best thing that I did, and I did it early on, was just sort of release the valves, including down to the dates when things were due. At one point, Canvas just got the better of me. And of course, anxiety has traveled with me too. And so Canvas got the better of me and I'm just having such a difficult time. And I told the students at one of my grad classes, I said, I'm done with this. It's really getting the better of me. I'm not mastering it right now. I'm driving you all nuts. I'm just going to open up the whole course. Forget about the deadlines. If Canvas gives you a warning, just let me know. Ignore it. I'm the person behind the machine. I will make it work. Do not worry. It's fine. And I remember coming out of that class and thinking, oh my gosh, I just told them not to worry about deadlines. And this means they're going to do nothing. And then at the end of the semester, I'm going to have 50,000 papers to read. That didn't happen. I think everybody is doing the best that they can with what they have in front of them. And so being sort of optimally flexible has given people the room to, maybe I turned it in 3 hours late and that's fine, but it didn't really affect my grading in any meaningful way or my workload in any meaningful way. So I think this has been a year where I have learned the power of flexibility. And what's really cool about that is that I think I'm going to carry some of that forward post-pandemic and really, I think for graduate seminars, if people need to join online, I'm going to be a lot more flexible about that. If folks need to turn in things late, I'm going to be a lot more flexible, I think, than I have been. And I think the other piece that I've done this year that has been really helpful is I think I've asked more questions than I typically do. And so I will check in, I see that you haven't turned in your paper on time. Like, do you want to check in? Is everything okay? What can I do to support you? And just getting that context has really helped me individualize in a really reasonable way, right? So if you had to go be with your family, somebody has passed away, and you're struggling, you're simply just struggling, turn in your 2 papers the following week, or, when you get back, let's talk and figure out a plan. But also maybe next class you keep your camera turned off, because we are talking about, especially in my graduate courses, we're talking about a lot of really personal issues. And I found that cameras were kind of going off and on as people were trying to manage their emotions and not wanting to make them public. And I would use the chat function. Are you okay? Let me know what's going on. Just instead of saying, hey, turn your camera on or whatever, just checking in gently. And I can't think of a single person that didn't respond well to that. Everybody appreciated being checked in on. And I think took responsibility for participating as fully and as well as they could in our learning community, which was really wonderful for me, because I think we put structures in place to ensure that people are participating appropriately. And I think I took those off and then found everybody wants to build this community. We're all here for it. And so it's okay if it's not, if all the edges aren't perfectly straight. Like, we're doing a lot of learning and we're building something together here that's really powerful. So I don't know. Does that get at your question?
It does. And it makes me think that even though I'm an optimist, probably in fall semester, we're not all magically going to be okay, right? We would have recovered from this, forgotten about it, come out stronger, whatever that individualistic mentality that might think you can just push forward.
Mm-hmm.
So as we think about going into the fall semester, what should we be thinking about to avoid just kind of brushing it off and pretending that it hadn't happened, especially because I'm predicting that the disparities that kind of cracked now, again, aren't going to get fixed, right? Some of our students are going to be doing more grieving than others. Some are still going to have employment uncertainty that they didn't have before. So maybe just some thoughts about how do we not obsess in the past, but not move too far forward to the future in a way that's not helpful.
I love that question. And I love your beautiful brain for creating it and thinking about it. And it just, there's such compassion behind that question. I'm just in love with it. One of the things that we have done, and I credit my faculty, I think we have a really nice community of faculty that are thoughtful, and we help each other be as good as we can together as a training community. We have collectively really shifted to talking to students about self-care. And at the undergraduate level, that's a little bit harder to do. There are more students, although we have done some of that. With my grad students, no question. And I meet with them weekly and I always check in, how are you doing? How's the bigger picture going? It's something that I have done for years, but I think I'm doing it sort of more intentionally and with a different bit of a pace. So I'm not waiting for a signal that something may be amiss that I need to check in. I'm just sort of proactively checking in. And one of the big things in mental health is, maybe my students are fine and they have a house and they're paying rent, but maybe their family members are not. And so folks have shifted. I mean, imagine on a graduate student stipend, sending money home to help your family with bills. This has happened historically, and especially for our students of color that may come from more marginalized communities. actually for our majority students that come from socioeconomically disadvantaged contexts as well. It has happened historically, but it's happening more now. And so I think just that proactive checking in, like, how are you and how is your community, right? Because you are going to make it through grad school because you have a community of support that helps you get through it. And if they're not okay, then you're missing out on some support. I think there's been more of that. This year I added, actually on our annual evaluation letter, I added a whole paragraph on this has been the COVID year and it's been challenging. And the fact that you have continued to make progress in the program is particularly noteworthy and important in the context of this pandemic. And so this speaks to your resilience and to your commitment and whatnot. And so it's written in a hopefully somewhat eloquent way. But I'm adding that to every single letter this year because we've gone through a trauma. And when you think about trauma and the impact of trauma, you're absolutely right. It's going to echo forward because it does. And one of the most powerful things that we do with it at the very beginning is we name it. We got to name it. This thing happened. If there's been violence, if there's been disruption, if there's been trauma, you name it. And so I think naming it with some degree of regularity and acknowledging the strengths, because we also don't want to go down this has been a disaster of a year. What a terrible year. Everything's gone wrong. No, I've seen amazing things, incredible achievements, and incredible stick-to-itiveness and resilience and all of the good things. And so noting that and putting them still in their context of what has occurred, I think is probably the best thing that I have done for helping prepare for this summer. And I've told everybody, I expect you to take time off. And by the way, I'm also taking time off because I think modeling that is important. And we don't know what's going to happen in the fall. So we shall engage with the same flexibility that we engaged last year and still hope for the best.
That is a perfect lead in, which is not to just think about the students, but think about ourselves. Mm-hmm. And that we have also, had to change the way we teach. And this has been I know I'm more tired now than I've been in 15 years of teaching. And even though I haven't had it the worst it could be, it doesn't mean it wasn't hard. So you did say taking some time off. I think that sounds fantastic. I'm already making some plans in my head about that. But do you have a few other things that you wish that your colleagues would do to help themselves come back more prepared for next semester?
Yeah, I will go back to the thing that I said, which is modeling. I taught ethics for many years, and the finding in the literature that I always kept coming to that was both horrifying and kind of satisfying too was it doesn't matter what you teach in your ethics class, it matters what you do. And I thought, oh, that's horrifying because now I have to behave in this like super ethical way at all times because it's what I do that it's powerful. And then of course I gave birth to 2 humans and then that lesson became crystal clear, right? It is all in what you do, forget about what you say. And I think that is really critical right now. And so my students seeing me take downtime. And so how do I manage my manuscript revision? And how do I manage my course revision? And how do I manage, attending to them, but doing so in a way that still also honors the time that I need to take off to restore? I think that's probably the most powerful thing that we can all do. So if you're answering emails at midnight, your students are going to learn that faculty answer student emails at midnight. I had a really sweet colleague say, my emails, like he has, I don't know what it's called, but there's a doohickey in his email. And I found mine too, so I can do it now, where he sends all after 5 o'clock, all of his emails are sent later. So they don't go out. Any email that he drafts after 5 o'clock and before 8 a.m. goes out at 8 a.m. the next day. And it's kind of a brilliant intervention if you think about it, because what happens is you learn to not expect an email back from this person. So if you want to catch them, you catch them before 5 o'clock. And if not, you wait till the next day. And I think thinking of details like that, right? How are you communicating how you take care of yourself to others, and how is it evident in your behavior? I just think that is the most powerful thing we can do.
Fantastic. That's a very good concrete suggestion and a good reminder, right? That if we want to show our students that we care, we need to show that we also care about ourselves, because it tells them they can care about themselves as well. Mm-hmm. So thank you so much. Is there any other thing you were really hoping to tell the listeners, or do you feel like you've gotten to give the nuggets you were hoping to share?
Yeah, I think I've given the nuggets. I think if I had to add anything, I probably would add my biggest struggle on that last point of modeling self-care is that I have these competing values of, yes, I want to take care of myself because I want to last a long time, and a competing value of I always want to be there for my students. So they have my cell phone number and they have my email and they know how to reach me and they can come home and they can knock on my door. And I think balancing that. So when I talk about modeling, I think for some of us that's harder, and that learning to say, I really want to help you with this, and I'm having dinner with my kids right now, I'll get back to you tomorrow morning, has probably been one of the biggest skills that I have learned this year. And so learning how to say no in a way that's supportive. So I'm still there for my students, but also actively making space to take care of myself. Because I think working from home the first 2 months, I felt like I was working 24/7. Like I would wake up and I would think, where did my day end? I feel like I was at the computer and then I passed out and then I came back into consciousness and I'm connected to this computer again, right? This is really bizarre. And so making that space has been something that I've learned this year, and something that I think I would encourage all of the humans and all of the land to do.
Terrific. Well, thank you so much for sharing your time and expertise. I learned a lot, and I suspect our listeners will too. And I wish you an excellent break and restorative summer. Thank you.
Thank you. Be well, be safe, and may you be always surrounded by love.
I'll second that.